You're tuned to Radio Big. I'm DJ Atomica, the eyes and ears of SSX for spectators and competitors alike. Broadcasting live from my nifty little sound booth with access to over 262 mountain cams.
Man, so, this video has been a longer time coming than I would have liked. What can I say? The God of War series kind of took a lot out of me, and, I don't know, I've just been kind of in an SSX mood as of late. Part of me wants to blame that on the weather, but hey, if nothing else, what better of a time would it be to cover a snowboarding game than while it's about to snow? At least, you know, in some parts of the world. It only just occurred to me that I've never done an intro for this video series, so I mean, I guess I might as well start that off, right? My name is Prince Mouse. You can call me Ian, and this is the series that I like to call Rose-Tinted Looking Glass. A series entirely dedicated to some of my favorite things growing up, with an emphasis on being as biased as possible towards the things that I like. Not saying things won't get critically looked at, but if they're on this series, it's a pretty safe bet that, well, I hold a lot of this stuff close to my heart. Last time we were talking about SSX, we ended off with Tricky, a perfect sequel slash re-release to what is basically the best arcade snowboarding that you can get in the entire gaming scene. At least to me. If this is the first SSX video you're seeing from this series, then don't worry about it. It's not like there's a narrative or anything really tying these games together, and you can jump in at any point. You can even go back if you want to. I feel that every game has something to offer, if for no other reason than to look at critically. These first 3 games are sick, I like them a lot, and the structure of this video is going to be a little bit different just as a fair warning. If you watch the previous 2 videos about the series, then you might immediately notice that I'm talking over the intro cutscene for the game. And that's because this intro just goes on for literally 3 minutes, which is a long time, and I don't want to immediately lose half of the viewer base by just having this cutscene go on. If you're a big fan of this intro cinematic, then I'm sorry to rob that from you by talking over it, but this should probably highlight that this video is going to be very different to practically every other RTLG that I've made so far. And that's because there's a lot of game going on. I'm not going to be talking about every stage that you can race down or trick down. That's because there's a lot of them, and there's other reasons for that too that we'll get into much later. Let's go ahead and wrap up this intro here. It's good to be back. Take it away, DJ Atomica.
Enough talk. Time to ride. Stay tuned right here to Radio Big.
You know you're in for a good time whenever the game immediately starts throwing adaptive OST in your face. This video is largely going to focus on the Conquer the Mountain portion of the game. This is an individual campaign mode, if you want to call it that, and it's where the bulk of the game is. Single event is self-explanatory. It lets you pick any level that you have previously unlocked. And multiplay is short for multiplayer. I think that's the only game that's ever called multiplayer just multiplay, and that's kinda weird. Previews were for other games that Electronic Arts was making at the time, which, given that this game has been out for almost 20 years, none of these are new, but it's interesting that they're there still as sort of a time capsule for what was going to be new at the time. There's a trailer for Need for Speed Carbon, which is pretty cool, but unfortunately I didn't play that one. Sorry, Need for Speed Carbon fans. Picking a character here doesn't seem immediately too different from the other 2 games in this series, but it is an important choice still. Given how we're playing some form of a campaign mode, picking a character is a semi-permanent option. You have to worry about leveling up a character's given stats, and as the game goes on, each individual stage is going to be more difficult. So honestly, just pick one that you think you'll like. Y'all ought to know that my main man is Max, so gotta pick him. And after a short save sequence, we are greeted with this.
You're listening to Radio Big. Here's the latest. I saw anyone heading over to Peak One's Green Bay station right now. Once their competitors will either be picking their event or dropping the hype and taking in a bit of that free ride groove. Some may even stop off at the lodge to gear up. Regardless, I'll be watching it all from this little booth.
Immediate first impression, this is awesome. With absolutely zero warning, the game thrusts you into the main gameplay. You do not get a tutorial here. The closest you get to a tutorial is just this little bit right here. It gives you a rundown on how the game works and how to advance in the game. Other than that though, that's it. If you've never played an SSX game before, and you're trying to grapple with the controls, then the game does not care if you fall on your face 17 times before you get to the first venue. It's a trial and error learning experience. But I've always been of the mind that SSX by itself was intuitive enough just on its own to let you get the controls nailed down pretty seamlessly and really quickly. Also, we don't have a level select here. The individual venues and the events that you go to actually participate in the game's competitions and such, those are blended seamlessly into the world itself. There's big signs telling you where to go and where the gates are to start any of these events. To me, this is sort of the perfect pick up and play zen moment in video games. You just start playing as soon as you do a little bit of menu navigation, and that's it. And on that note, it's time for the first race. Okay, before we move any more forward with the actual race itself, I need to mention something. As the SSX series went on, they like to use more and more licensed music in their games. Licensed music has always kind of been the bane of anybody who is a content creator. As a result of this, I cannot use any of the music in this game or in On Tour whenever I eventually do that game as well. I want to apologize ahead of time because I really want to get the full vibe of this game down, but the music isn't mine, and really it's not SSX 3's either. And the first two SSX games already got content claimed. The reason I didn't do anything about those games is because the song that ended up playing was for Untracked. Finished Symphony by Hybrid was a track that was so important and impactful for Untracked that I couldn't bear to not include it. At that time, I only had less than 100 subscribers per video. But as I'm moving forward into getting more subscribers and eventually getting to the point where I can get monetized for these videos, I can't do licensed music anymore. I don't like the idea of starting out this game with not having any of its music in place, and I have to find alternatives somewhere, somehow. Trust me when I say I don't look forward to it, because the alternative music choices that I have to pick are going to be iffy at best, and if you're playing this game on your own, the music does help to sell the feeling of playing this game. All the music fits like a glove in all of that good old early 2000s charm. But again, it's not my music, and it's not the game's music either. I also just find it really weird that, for SSX Tricky, the song Tricky by Run DMC did not get copyright claimed at all, even though that song is plastered all over the game and is kind of that game's main theme song. But no, just Finished Symphony twice in a row, I guess. Whatever. Thank you for indulging me. It's time for what everybody actually came here for. Our first actual venue in the game is called Happiness, which is a weirdly fitting name for the track itself. My feelings towards Happiness are similar to my feelings towards Garibaldi in SSX Tricky. It's not exactly anything to write home about, but it gets the job done as being a proper introduction into the game itself. It's really good for players who are still trying to get used to the controls, and for veterans, it's a good non-challenge to just sort of turn your brain off and go down the mountain. It sets itself apart from other stages of its ilk simply because there's nothing too demanding for the player to do. And like I said with the other game's starting stages, there's no distractions here. And if nothing else, I think it just helps to condition the player to the game's more basic fundamentals. And speaking of fundamentals, let's talk controls. I know this part's gonna be not very interesting, so I'll keep it brief. What I think is interesting to note for people who just simply don't play these games is that the force of gravity and moving down the mountain is constantly acting against you. By which I mean, to keep it simple, you're moving forward constantly. You can control your speed by holding back on the control stick, but especially in modes like Race, speed is sort of the name of the game here. The reason I highlight that aspect in the game in specific is because, again, we have something of an open world going on here. You might be wondering what happens if you miss something if you accidentally go in the wrong direction, because again, you can't really go back. There is a fix for this, but again, we'll go over it whenever we're actually talking about the open world portions of the game. But in similarly left stick based shenanigans, we also have the ability to move left and right, obviously. If you hold down the X button, you'll prime a jump. The longer you hold it, the higher you go up in the air, and if you time this well with the ramp, indicated by the little red or yellow chevrons on the ground, then this is how you end up getting air. The more air you have, the longer you can perform tricks. Tricks in this game are indicated by whatever spin or grab you can do on a board. Y'all still with me? Okay, cool. What is the point of doing tricks? Well, you see, depending on what mode you're doing it on, tricks are actually pretty important for getting score. That obviously doesn't matter so much in race mode, but even still, tricks still have their place in race mode because, simply speaking, performing a trick regardless of whatever mode you pick will fill up a boost meter. You have to successfully land whatever combo of tricks that you currently have in order to get the boost actually filled. If you fail to land the trick by wiping out, then you'll end up losing all the boost you could have gained, indicated by the red bar. This little bar indicates just how much boost you're about to gain. You don't have it saved yet, quote unquote. But the spiral around the bar indicates how much boost you actually have. And once you have boost, simply hold square and you'll start moving faster. Obviously, learning when and where to boost is super important for the main gameplay loop. Carefully deciding to use a boost before you jump can get you even more airtime, and that means more tricks. There's a little bit more in the vein of controls that I could talk about, but we'll save that for a little bit later whenever it's a little bit more prevalent. And if you watched the tricky video, then you probably know what's coming next. As with any open world game worth their salt, we have a fast travel mechanic. The transport menu opens up anytime you complete a stage. It can also be opened by traveling to any lodge in the open world itself. It's the signs labeled transport, and they typically have like a ski lift or a helicopter or something. What's actually really nice about this is that you can decide to travel to anywhere where you currently have a peak unlocked. We only have Peak 1 unlocked right now, but you can go to any stage that you haven't even tried yet. Just so long, again, as it's in the peak itself. And if you're wondering what a lodge is, well, we'll talk about that later. If you want access to the other two peaks, well, there's 3 ways that we can unlock them. Either get medals in the race mode, get medals in the show-off mode, or get $100,000 across the entire peak. In regards to race and show-off, you also need to beat your rival in whatever challenge they give you. The challenges are always consistent. It's usually just race or trick down the back country, which is the very beginning of the peak, get through the beginning portion of the peak faster than them, or get more points than them respectively. I really like this method of unlocking stuff throughout the game because it gives you so much freedom to go about it. Even though the whole money thing is probably the hardest goal to achieve, just the fact that you can unlock the other peaks in and of itself through this method, I don't know, just that in and of itself is really impressive to me. If you wanted SSX 3 to be nothing more than a snowboarding simulator, you still get rewarded for that. That's a level of understanding that your players just want fun that's kind of unheard of to me. Of course, if you're good at the races or show-offs anyway, it doesn't really matter, but again, I just really like its inclusion. I think that's neat. Moving right along, we get done with the second race in Peak 1 and something happens. I'm sorry that I'm glossing over Metro City, but I promise I'll have more to say about it later. Okay, so has it been 10 minutes yet? It's been 14? Oh my god. Okay, well, we have suddenly been challenged by this little shit, and his name is Griff. He's another playable character that you have the option to pick, but also, more importantly for this moment right here, he's acting as our rival. And yeah, I guess that means rival fights are back. They work quite a bit differently as compared to SSX Tricky, but in my opinion it's still a perfectly fine system. As the game feels the need to tell us, a rival race is pretty much just a one-on-one race down the back country or beginning portion of the peak where they challenged us. They like to do a little bit of banter just as the race is starting this time. And don't worry, if you don't like Griff, neither do I. He's gonna get what's coming to him. And yes, that is a threat. In regards to the rival races though, I really like this system. It's sort of portrayed as an unofficial race, off the record between two competitors. It's like the SSX equivalent of having a fist fight outside of a bar. I kinda dig that, that's neat to me. What's similarly interesting though is that the tops of these mountains are often pretty dangerous. There's no signage or anything that tells you where exactly to go. The other two peaks in this game are going to be a lot more inherently dangerous, their beginning backcountries included. But once again, like the first race in Peak 1 and like the rest of Peak 1, it's a good introduction. I think it serves the game pretty well on that front. Some of you might be remembering that backcountry is kind of already a thing, and if you've watched the previous SSX videos, they're not the same thing here. I'm sorry I keep putting stuff off, but once again, I'll clarify here in a minute what I actually mean by that. This initial backcountry is really cool because specifically, more than any other pre-race backcountry, it reminds me the most about Untracked by itself. That's more or less a blanket statement that goes over all of the backcountries and all of the peaks, but the other two peaks have more stuff going on just kind of in general. There's a certain purity to Untracked that I feel like Happiness kind of encapsulates here. This might be a biased take, but I actually think I prefer Untracked to anything in this game in terms of just raw mountain with nothing else going on. But objectively speaking, I don't have any real issues with this venue. No quarrels to speak of, it's fine. Good, even. But there's still something about this that sort of rubs me the wrong way. I'll just, put that statement in the some other time pile. We'll get back to that one too.
Griff Simmons is getting a little big for his britches. Okay, it seems the pint-sized powerhouse feels the real estate on Peak 1 is his own personal jibbing ground.
Okay, I want to start talking about the lodge now. Or the lodges, rather. Just realized I said jizz on accident. Anyway, what are lodges? What do they do? Well, for starters, I think lodges might just be my favorite new system in SSX 3. This is where you're going to be spending all of your money. And just to nail one thing down right off the bat here, invest in stats as soon as you can. It's going to make the whole game feel better and make you, as a writer, that much more capable. I could go and explain what all the stats do, but I'm just gonna not mention any of that just to save some time. They make your boards feel better to control, and they make the writer you choose also feel better to control. That's kind of the gist of it. Each of those little separation lines dictate how expensive the next upgrade is going to be to get. What's more, you actually have the ability to buy costume pieces for any of your characters. What individual pieces you can buy is largely determined on what character you pick. It sort of goes with their style, more or less. There's even a couple of particularly expensive things you can buy here that completely change how your character looks. They're usually pretty goofy, but sometimes there's some really cool stuff in there too. It's up to you if you want to buy it, if you want to go for that style or not, and I don't know, that's neat. Oh my god, the first lodge has a crown, give it to me. It's so expensive. What's important to note though is that every lodge has something different on offer that you can purchase. The stats that you can purchase are always going to be identical. The prices don't change between lodges there. You also have the ability to buy new Uber moves here too, and you can slot them on your character. But whenever it comes to the individual gear pieces, those are what change between lodges. So it's worth checking every lodge whenever you see a new one come up. This is also going to be an interesting thing that's going to lead into another little aspect of this game that I'll mention. You can also purchase new boards, but as far as I know, the only boards you can purchase are BX boards. For those not in the know, in the previous two SSX games, there was 3 types of boards that you can choose from, being Freestyle, Alpine, and BX boards. To keep it succinct, Freestyle boards were better at tricking, and Alpine boards were better at speed. BX boards are the perfect in-between. Those are your hybrid boards. What sort of bothers me about this whole thing is that so much of the innate personality of SSX is kinda lost here. It doesn't go just as far as simply, there's only one type of board now. There's all kinds of stuff that just kind of rubs me the wrong way here. This is largely going to go into the pile of my issues with the character personalities in this game. Because while they all say different things, while they all have their own individual personalities while they're talking, they also talk a good bit less. SSX has never been known to be particularly wordy, but the characters were distinct in and of themselves, and you could feel that by simply just playing as them. What their interests were, and how they portrayed themselves, and all that other good stuff. And there's still some of that here. If you want to know some fun fact information about the characters, you can go to the writer details. That's also where you purchase the Uber moves. But also, the purchasable Uber moves kind of bother me too, actually. Take an Uber move like Guillotine, for example. This is a move that is pretty well known to be on Simon, but you can just kind of slap it on Mac and it's fine. The individual player freedom here kind of bothers me a little bit because it robs the rest of the characters from their personality. And let it be known, this is not a particularly huge issue in this game. But with the power of, well, here, hold on, let me do some research real quick. 20 plus years of hindsight, it's kind of interesting to just consider all of this and really think that this might have been the start of the series' decline. I don't mean to blame SSX 3 for where the series would eventually end up, but this is where a lot of the focus started to shift for the SSX series. And if you're looking at the game critically, it's pretty easy to see where it started. I don't know, there'll be more to talk about that whenever this series does eventually end on this video series, but for now, what is here and what has changed is mostly good and different, including the lodges. So we just got done with the rival races in Peak 1. What is there left to do in this peak? That's a trick question, of course. The real answer is a lot, actually. But there's also technically one more race, and it is important if you're trying to actually progress through the game, but I'm going to gloss over it here because it's kind of not necessary to talk about. It's certainly not necessary to show. Basically, the final race in any peak is essentially simply race down the entire length of the peak, and your only real opponent in that race is simply just the timer. Typically, whenever you do an entire peak race, the timer is roughly about 15 minutes, give or take. And this sounds like a really long time, the average race is only about 3 minutes, but let it be known you barely notice how long it actually takes. That's just how good this game and this game series is at getting you invested into the game. As I said before, the peak races are necessary in order to progress to the next peak. This is the same for not only going from Peak 1 to Peak 2, but also Peak 2 to Peak 3. Not only does this show off how varied the level design is in each peak, but this also serves a dual purpose in showing you that the game is seamlessly blended with each level. Like I said, I won't show this race in its entirety because you've already seen all of these venues already, but I will take this opportunity to show off that the game has 3 modes. If you were paying attention to the intro cinematic, the game itself was telling you that there's a lot more than 3 modes now, but really it's just set dressing. If you want to count it, technically the game has side modes, I guess. The 3 primary modes are more or less just umbrella terms. You've already seen plenty of race mode, so there's not really much I can add on to that discussion there. The second mode is free ride, and this is relatively self-explanatory. There's no objectives in free ride, you simply go down the mountain. That really is as complex as it gets. Free ride is valuable simply because there is absolutely zero pressure in just going down the mountain now. In this way, free ride can act as sort of the perfect excuse to get more practice into a mode before you actually attempt it. And what's more, if you really like the environments in this game, free ride is the perfect opportunity to simply just explore them. No time limit, no score limit, no competitors. But there is one little thing that free ride does offer, and it is actually pretty interesting. And the third main mode, and also the bulk of where these other sub-modes come from, is show off. In the vaguest possible terms, show off is simply the trick-based mode. There are score brackets for 3rd, 2nd, and 1st place, and you have to meet those in order to actually win those events. I'll also just mention it here because if I don't, I will forget later. But race is also broken up into individual heats. This is simply just another word for rounds, basically. You go down the one menu the one time, and you have to meet the qualifiers by being in either 1st, 2nd, or 3rd place. Then you have to do it again a little bit faster, and then you have to do it a 3rd time the fastest. Heats have always been a thing in the SSX series, and there can be a little bit of a problem with them if you simply don't like the venue that the race is asking you to go down, but it's another excuse for more practice. Oh, also, I completely forgot for a minute, but show off is also broken up into heats. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 2, and there's not really any rhyme or reason as to how many heats are in a show off venue. That's okay though, because typically speaking, show offs are really short, so, you know. Of course, heats can be entirely circumvented if you simply just pick the single event mode at the main menu, but you don't make any progress in single event, so only do that if you just want to pick up and play for a little bit. As I expressed before, show off has kind of a lot going on, so let's go ahead and break that one down. Alrighty, so, what's up with show off? Or, I guess it's called freestyle now, sure. I know this video has been extremely explanation heavy, so pretty much solely because of that, I'm going to be explaining each individual freestyle mode as they come up. I'm also going to throw the particular venues of note in here as well and just kind of lump them together. It's for all of these reasons that I'm going to start off explaining the simplest of the show off modes. So let's start off with Big Air mode. Big Air venues are notable for being some of the shortest venues in the entire SSX series. Literally all they contain is just a couple of really big ramps, and whenever you're in the air after you jump off of those ramps, your goal is to get as much points as possible by performing tricks. As I mentioned before, there are a couple ways to perform tricks. Spinning and grabbing the board is one of the most direct ways that you can get points for this. And again, by proxy, boost too. Grabbing your board is done by using the shoulder buttons, and if you're holding onto your board whenever you land, this will force you to wipe out regardless of where you land on the board. This is all pretty simple stuff, but what's far more important to mention is the single most important mechanic to the entire SSX series. You might have noticed that my boost meter has been either glowing yellow or orange. Whenever you get your boost meter filled all the way up, this will force it to glow that yellow color, and this allows you to perform uber tricks. In the previous footage, you might have been noticing my character doing some crazy flips and stuff, and spinning the board around their bodies and such, and these are ubers. A new mechanic that started in SSX 3 is actually level 1 and level 2 ubers though. Performing an uber is as simple as being in the air for about a second, holding square and then pressing a shoulder button. There's even a couple of ubers if you press multiple shoulder buttons and then the square button. Level 1 ubers are pretty risk-free. They put you in a short but uncancelable animation, and successfully performing the animation will end up giving you a lot of points and a lot of boost. Every time you perform a level 1 uber though, you end up spelling the word uber in the upper right corner of the screen. Fill this word all the way up and you'll end up getting level 2 ubers, or super ubers as they're called. If you continue to do level 2 ubers and get the super part of the word filled out, then you'll end up getting infinite boost for about 1 minute. This means that tricks and ubers by extension suddenly have a lot of value in race mode. Level 2 ubers end up doing the same thing as level 1s, but their animations are longer and they end up giving you more points. What's particularly important about all of the ubers is that if you wipe out while performing one, you'll do what I like to call a hard wipeout. Your board will detach from your feet. Whenever you do the little mashing minigame to get back on your board, it'll force you to reset and obviously drain a lot of your boost meter. This is sort of the pinnacle of risk-reward in these games. And it goes a step further too if you remember when and where to boost, when to gain your boost. Is this jump big enough to do an uber right now? And all this other little stuff too that goes into how you play the game. Getting better at these games is all about optimizing each individual action that you do. It's things like how fast can you complete a race, how many points can you get in one jump. And all of these little things just help form a flow state surrounding the entire game. And arguably the best part, all of this is really subtextual. Your average player is not going to be thinking about things like this. You just do it. Like I keep saying, intuitive. And to me, I think that's why people really like these games. Me included. No. Alright, it's peak 2 time. Things are getting amped up. The jumps are more perilous. The environment more treacherous. The snow is storming. Peak 2 possibly has my favorite backcountry in the entire game. As a fan of this series, this is really only the first time that we've seen something like this. Oh yeah, and watch out for some of these rails. Sometimes the logs will just fall on you, and these are called trap rails. I call them that anyway. They can mess up your jump and force you to wipe out. It's pretty mean, and you only start seeing them here. Sort of a throwaway little bit that I said in the original SSX Tricky video was that I found it really weird that there wasn't any weather effects happening in the game. And go figure, here in SSX 3, whenever weather effects actually are present, it adds so much more to the atmosphere. It's genuinely cool to see this stuff here. Everything just feels so much more perilous, and like a person wasn't meant to traverse any of this. And if I'm allowed to speak genuinely, I think it really does look pretty still. That's a biased take. Again, game is 20 years old, I know that. But I don't know, just seeing it here makes me wish it was in the older games. Whenever you get done with this backcountry, same as always, don't forget to check the lodge. Always new stuff in there. And once again, daily reminder, bump up your stats anytime you get a lot of money. You will need those stat increases, trust me. So, I must confess, we're largely going to be skipping over Ruthless. I personally don't think there's a whole lot to write home about here. Which, again, sorry if you like this stage, it's just, personally, I don't know, it's not super memorable to me. That being said, it does show off another mechanic that I do want to talk about. So remember whenever I was talking about that backcountries were kind of already a thing in the SSX series? Okay, cool. Now do you see that glass sign with the SSX logo on it? Anytime you see one of these, you probably should be running straight through it. The game uses these as signifiers for shortcuts. In the previous games, these used to be called backcountries, but as it stands now, I guess we'll just call them shortcuts. They're typically extra dangerous little paths inside the track, but once again, with the rest of the risk-reward stuff going on in this game, they act as a pretty blatant way to get ahead in the races. And once again, if you just want to explore it, then you totally can. See what's past that point and see if anything's particularly noteworthy. However, it should be duly noted that not every shortcut is signified by a glass sign. There are just some paths that you have to just test your luck with. So, once again, if you so wish, just explore around and get familiar with the stages. Simply put, stay aware of your surroundings, and keep an eye out for secret stuff. Oh hey, and speaking of secret stuff, y'all remember back whenever I was talking about Freeride and how there was one other thing I didn't mention yet? These are called Big Challenges. The reason they're called Big Challenges is because EA Big is a subsidiary of Electronic Arts. They made a lot of other weird sports games in the early 2000s, and they're pretty well received, just sort of in general. But no, the Big Challenges in and of themselves can get really varied. Make no mistake, I will not be mentioning most of the Big Challenges simply because there are a lot of them, and you can only access them by going through Freeride. They have stuff like a time trial mode and a short trick mode. There's this one here that has something akin to a break the targets minigame, and just all kinds of stuff. Like everything else in this game, successfully completing the challenges will end up giving you a lot of money. And yeah, I don't know, other than that, that's kind of it for Big Challenges. In my opinion, they're a pretty natural fit for an open world snowboarding game, and I don't know, other than that, I just think they're cool. They're practically everywhere across all of the peaks, and a lot of them are actually really difficult too, though, so I guess if you're just struggling with one, then come back to it later. Before I forget though, there's one little thing that's completely unrelated that I do want to mention. I got a pro tip for y'all. If you get a little bit too much air and you're about to crash into a ceiling or otherwise crash into a wall, try to hit it with the bottom of your board. I don't know if I have any footage of it, but if I do, then I'll probably show it off at some point in the video anyway, because it always looks cool, it always makes you feel good, and most importantly, I guess, you don't wipe out whenever you do it, so, you know, there's that. All of the SSX games let you wall bonk or ceiling bonk, and like I said before, it always feels good, so just, if you want to completely avoid getting wiped out, then there are worse ways to go about it, I guess. And without any transition at all, it's Intimidator time. After giving it some thought, Intimidator might be my favorite track in SSX 3. There's a lot of set pieces in the venue itself, and all of it's really cool. Plenty of y'all know by now that I'm a fan of glass tubes, and we got one of those in here as well. Oh, wait, hold on a sec, I gotta do something important. What do you want from me? I told you that kid had it coming. Didn't expect SSX 3 to be the game that condones child violence. Right, sorry, I should probably explain what just happened there. That arguably cruel action I just took on that child is called a knockdown. The consistent thing about the knockdowns in all of the games is that, for one, obviously they forced whoever was attacked into a wipeout, which is good on its own. But arguably more importantly, what it also does is fill up your boost meter all the way, immediately into doing uber moves. Knockdowns show up in every one of the games, but the consequences of a knockdown change with just about every game that comes out. Luckily for me, there are hardly any consequences in SSX 3, so simply speaking, just knock down whoever you can if you want to get some boost. It's particularly helpful if you're struggling against rival races. And like I said, no, don't worry, there isn't a relationship mechanic in this game like there was in Tricky. Do keep in mind that other competitors can also do a knockout on you, and if they do, all of the rules apply to them as well. You can see who's about to knock you down based on whether or not they have an exclamation point above their head. The rhyme or reason for which they actually have this hostility towards you doesn't seem to be there entirely, at least I don't understand how exactly it works. But I'll also just mention, because it's important to note too, if you want to protect yourself from a knockdown without necessarily getting out of the way of it, if you press both of the shoulder buttons down whenever you're not in the air, you'll cover your head and this will protect you from a knockdown. To actually initiate the knockdown, you need to hold one of the shoulder buttons in either direction that it's bound to, R1 for a right punch and L1 for a left punch. You can also trigger a knockdown by simply running into somebody, or landing on top of them if you were in the air. Going back to talking about the stage though, Intimidator is really cool. For instance, if you botch this jump right here, it's actually much faster than going through the intended method. Anytime I'm doing a race on this venue, this is what I like to do. Oh, but hey, also there's this too, check this out. Wee. I must confess, every single time I go through this stage, I have to do the little loop-de-loop in the tube thing. I don't know what any of this is called, I don't care, this is the shit. And then immediately after that, it just throws this random Japanese architecture at you, like, I don't know, what? Oh god, oh no, I'm falling through the world. Oh no, help me. But see, that's sort of the thing, right? A lot of the stages leading up until now are sort of milquetoast by comparison to the rest of the games in the series. Well, rather the first two games in the series. There's nothing objectively wrong here. And once again, most of this is not realistic to how a real snowboarding venue would operate. I'll have more to say on that at the very end of this video, but for now I just kinda want to enjoy this. This stage really is peak SSX 3 to me. It really is just good, clean fun, and there's no other way I can really describe it. Absolutely adore this stage. And in my mind, absolutely worth highlighting. Hey, guess who has enough money for a crown now?
Gimme. Gimme, 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 gimme!
Okay, it's show-off time again, and you know what that means. More tricks and more trick explanations. I promise this one's gonna be quicker. Slopestyle is the new name for just going down a stage, like a race stage for example, doing tricks in the allotted time and the allotted space. In other words, the original show-off. The cool and unique thing that SSX 3 brings to the table is that all of the venues are unique in and of themselves. They don't necessarily reuse tracks for any of the modes that you decide to play, with the exception of one of the race tracks becomes a show-off track as part of the rival race. Or rival show-off, sorry. Whatever, you get the point. In other news, there's also a brand new type of Uber move you can pull off in this game, and these are called rail Ubers. Don't call them Rubers, don't call them Rubers, don't call them Rubers, don't call them Rubers. These Rubers, damn it, are all pretty safe whenever you really break it down. Their animations are never long, and they're a really safe and easy way to get a bunch of Ubers filled out all at once. You can even decide to hold the rail Uber if you're in the air still when you fall off the rail. Just, again, as with any Uber, make sure you land back on your board, else suffer a hard wipeout. Also, don't forget that those trick rails exist, those can mess you up pretty bad too. Wrapping back around to the slopestyle modes, there's not really any of them that I find particularly noteworthy. Once again, they're all fine, but if you give somebody who's never seen this game before a bunch of clips that are all from different stages, there's a non-zero chance they're gonna tell you it's from the same stage. This is a problem surrounding the entire game, but again, I'll talk about that later. I'm about ready to wrap this up. Let's go ahead and head to Peak 3 now. Oh wait, hold on, one thing before we actually move on. One last pro tip. There's a pretty interesting exploit in this game if you want to get a bunch of points and boost very quickly. You can use it all across the game, and there's basically no repercussion to using it. Simply speaking, whenever you're rotating in the air, simply mash any of the directional buttons as fast as you can, and the game will count this as a late flip. From now on, if you decide to look at the combo feed at the top of the screen, you can kinda see the game spazzing out here a little bit. It basically rapid flashes that late spin, late flip, and that's how you know it's working. And joke's on y'all, I've been using it the entire playthrough because it just makes the entire game way easier. It's genuinely a good move, and it's really, really useful for this game in specific because it doesn't really show up in any other games, either past or future in this series. That's all I have to say for now though, let's go ahead and move on to Peak 3. Alright y'all, it's Peak 3 time, and the game is throwing absolutely everything it can at us. If I were to describe Peak 3 in exactly one sentence, in as vague and short of a way as possible, it would be short but sweet, but replace the sweet with just brutal. I can only imagine it would be really hard to breathe up here, right? Like, surely the atmosphere is really thin? It would have to be on the top of the mountain. The whole vibe of this backcountry just comes off as cold, distant, and completely uninterested in your well-being. And yes, that is putting it lightly. It is absolutely chaotic up here, and you really need to lock in order to not wipe out every 26 seconds. We got falling rocks, low ceilings with sheets of ice, and there's even a cannon up here for some reason. The atmospheric pressure that this game has been nailing down the whole time is really turned up to 11 here. The game so far has done a really good job at conveying just the sense of scale with all of the peaks, despite how small they actually are if you were to take a super zoomed out view. You genuinely believe that these mountains are so much bigger than they actually are, and that would have been impressive back in the year 2000, but even still, we have a whole open world to deal with. I feel like this entire game, but especially Peak 3, has been really good at making you feel like you never really 100% understand the mountain. Yeah, I'm pretty sure whoever was flying that plane just now totally died. But we can't focus on that right now, we gotta try surviving ourselves. Whenever you get to this little canyon here, you know you're in the clear. Try your best to make it down to the lodge as fast as you can, as safe as you can, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so, immediate thing to note about this venue. It's the only truly unique stage in the entirety of Peak 3. What can I say, I told you that this peak was really short. And yeah, this one is called Gravitude. In terms of aesthetic uniqueness, there is one thing in this stage that's pretty cool. There are several parts throughout this venue that kind of remind me of some sort of airplane or biplane graveyard. You have to use these crashed airplanes as like ramps or rails and such. And beyond that, there's simply obstacles you have to avoid. I like the rationale here because it just reads to me that whoever the organizer is for the SSX 3 tournament didn't care to clean any of this up. They just sort of left it there and said, yeah, no, this is fine. Suitable challenge, it's totally not dangerous or anything. And to take that aesthetic a step further, many parts of this stage actually read like its own backcountry to me as well. In this way, it's also suitably dangerous like many of the backcountries are already. And yeah, I don't know, that might be all I have to say for this venue, but like I said, it's cool. The difficulty is appropriate, and it's at least pretty distinctly different from the rest of the tracks already, so I don't know. What else do I add here? Okay, final show-off mode, we're almost done here. Super pipe events are decidedly pretty simple. All in all, the main set piece here is simply just the half pipes. If you're going in the ascending order of peaks, then obviously there are going to be more half pipes and they're going to be in harder to reach places. Using the late spin, late flip method that I was talking about earlier, this is probably the easiest show-off mode in the entire game. The point requirements to get to all the brackets seems pretty daunting at first, but if you're doing this type of event correctly, it's really not hard to get a whole bunch of points. A pretty understated but still important mechanic in this game regarding the points is the combo multiplier on the top of the screen. The timer to keep the combo going decays very, very quickly, but that just means I can perfectly lead in with our last mechanic here. The mechanic in question is called manuals. To start performing a manual, all you have to do is tilt the right stick in a direction. You can keep it going by tilting it in a circle. When you start a manual, you'll pivot on either the nose or the tail of the board. You lose the ability to steer whenever you start performing a manual, so simply end it early if you want control again if you're lining up for a jump or whatever. They almost never give you a whole lot of points, but again, because of how fast the combo timer decays, manuals can keep it from going to 0. It'll typically see use in slopestyle, simply because there's a couple of long stretches where the timer can decay if you're not doing anything. So the manuals are here to give you something to do. You can even perform them on rails, which is pretty cool. Oh, and speaking of rails, because I need somewhere to put it, if you press circle while you're near a rail, you'll do a hand plant. Hand plants are pretty neat on their own, but they don't really do a whole lot in terms of gaining you points. Don't worry, they do have other applications though. Specifically, if you're really inventive, you can use them to reposition if you want to. Doubling back to the super pipe show-offs, doing the jumps at either end of the half pipe will kind of keep you still, by which I mean if you do a jump on a half pipe, it's practically impossible to steer off of the pipe. It sort of railroads you in this way. So if you decide to get fancy with the hand plant, you can reposition to another neighboring half pipe. And what's more, you can simply just cancel whatever big air you were trying to get. Again, a repositioning tool. That, and then also, you know, it looks cool, so there's that too. If you're wondering where literally any of this information comes from, well, see, the game doesn't really give you a tutorial for any of this. If you remember all the way back in the beginning of the playthrough, there's hardly any tutorials in this game. In fact, your only real hint that you can even do any of these mechanics is simply the intro cutscene. You can see some of the competitors doing these moves, and this can kinda sort of act like your hint in order to perform them. And yeah, I know, that's not like a whole lot to go off of or anything, but personally, as I'm sure won't surprise you, I really like this. This is gonna sound like some sort of philosophical nonsense, but to me, SSX has always been a game about the journey, not necessarily the destination. It's about actually just playing the game, getting better at the game, getting familiar and experimenting with stuff. If you randomly decide to wiggle the right stick and figure out, oh hey, I can do manuals that way, then you learned something. It really does feel like a discovery because again, the game didn't tell you that. And that same rule applies to stuff like the rail tricks and stuff too. And even the hand plants. If you're playing this game for long enough, you might even get the inclination to do the manuals on the rails. SSX has always been a series about just teaching you how to play it. You're constantly optimizing and constantly making new experiences, getting better and learning and all the other good stuff. And the game not feeling the need to tell you makes it out to be something of a revelation that you come across. It's just one of the many things that makes this game special to me. But unfortunately, I do have to wrap up this video at some point. So let's kick things off with the final race, the all-peak race.
Hey, Macca! Why don't you get your butt on over to the backcountry so I can kick it large?
Oh my god, look at that timer. Go figure, the game literally says all peak race, and make no mistake, you are going down every one of the peaks. You start from the throne backcountry and have to make it all the way down to Metro City. This is definitely a marathon race. But once again, with the rest of the other rival races, you don't really feel it. As long as you're playing relatively fast and efficiently, the time just kind of flies by. Of course, commentating over all of it is an entirely separate problem, so I'm gonna spare y'all that. As cool as this is, and yes, in case you were wondering, you could go down this exact same path in Freeride, and you would actually go through all the peaks again. You just have to be familiar enough with where the directions are, because otherwise you'll come across the dead ends, and those are, you know, their own tracks. But it's still possible, and it is really cool that the game just is a completely seamless open world. I know I've said that about 100 times now, but this is a new thing to this series, and it'll never not be just the coolest thing to me about this game. I'll definitely be skipping around a whole bunch, just sort of use this as background footage, and in its place, we're gonna start wrapping up now. Some honorable mentions for the things that I haven't brought up yet are things like the cheat code characters. Latest possible cheat code segment in a video, I know. You actually get one for completing the game, and that is the Unknown Rider. A consistent thing about all the cheat code characters in this game is that they don't have any voice lines. But if you're wondering if there's a more traditional cheat code-esque method to unlock the rest of the characters, there is. It's a passcode screen. Let it be known first off that there are a lot of characters in this game that can be unlocked through this method, but not all of them are going to show up in the same version of the game. Between the three primary versions, the GameCube, the PS2, and the Xbox version, you're going to get different characters, and I'm sure there's slight differences with all of them as well, just in terms of the main gameplay, but I don't know anything about that. I grew up with the PS2 version, so, as it shouldn't surprise you, that's the one I'm the most familiar with. The only one I'm familiar with, actually. I've never went out of my way to unlock them, but there's actually two characters that have their models so large that they actually don't fit in some of the tighter caves, which is kind of funny. If you know which ones I'm talking about, then you're probably aware of them. And if you aren't, then, I don't know, maybe try the game and see if you can unlock them. And, I mean, if nothing else, they're pretty funny, so. As with the end of any one of these RTLGs, what do I think about the game? This is going to be a pretty complicated set of feelings. I've always had a pretty complicated relationship with this game since I understood where the series would eventually end up. I'm not going to be talking about that here in this video because that's better saved for the end of the series, but as I alluded to whenever I was talking about the lodges, there's a fair argument to be made that the people behind this game at Electronic Arts started to focus on the wrong things for SSX. The mountain is wide, big, open, and seamless. There's no loading screens or anything. And that, on its face, is impressive. Really, when comparing just this game in a vacuum, it is truly something to marvel at. We have new age consoles boasting that they don't have any loading screens, and they have this game beat by about 20 years. But as it turns out, no loading screens, seamless open worlds has been a thing since the PS2. And doesn't that just make it more impressive? A lot of my complaints towards this game are more or less just nitpicks. I have something of a bitter taste in my mouth just after seeing what the game has started here for this series. Much of the characters' personalities are just lost. And as time goes on, each individual character that you come across or sometimes play as are just going to be less identifiable. They're going to be a lot more just a face. Some of them don't even talk in some of these games. And to me, personality in SSX has always been sort of the main sticking point. If you want to think about it like that, personality can go a step further with simply just the personality of the game itself. If you've played the previous two games in this series, think about stages like Tokyo Megaplex. Think about Aloha Ice Jam. Even stages as simple as Snow Dream or Alaska. Each of these stages had their own lighting, their own personality, their own identity. Do you remember whenever I brought up that point, if somebody wasn't familiar with this game and you showed them a bunch of clips, they would probably say it's all a part of the same venue? Well, the truth is, With a lot of these clips, I have been jumping back and forth to earlier parts in the game. How many of y'all actually noticed any of that? And that's kinda what I mean. The game is seamless, the world is seamless, but at what cost? The identifiable landmarks and lightings of all the stages are just not present here, or at least they're a little bit more grounded now. And if this were any other snowboarding game, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But my biases towards this series tells me that this is not exactly what SSX is about. And that just bothers me a lot. I need to confess something. Despite everything that I just said, I do not have a problem with SSX 3. In fact, whenever I get done editing this giant monster of a video, and get through with publishing this thing, I'm probably going to boot up SSX 3 again and just play it because I want to, right after I turn the music back on, because playing this thing without music is a sad experience. And actually, for the sake of viewer engagement bait, what's y'all's favorite music track in this game? My personal favorite has to go to Jerk It Out, and yes, that title is extremely dirty, it is exactly what you think it is. I don't know, just something about the beginning instrument just lives rent-free in my head. But no, getting back on track, I don't have a problem with SSX 3 whatsoever. As I said before, in a vacuum, it's an absolutely wonderful snowboarding game, and some of the best in the business for what it sets out to do in this genre of strange sports video games that are just completely unrealistic and extremely arcadey. If you decide to think about the venues in a very particular way, you might consider some of them to be references to older venues in this series. The first proper racetrack reminded me a lot of Garibaldi. And what's more, the other race in Peak 1, Metro City, is very obviously an allusion to Mercury City Meltdown. And those are cool. Sort of slapping these environments down in an open world area is a really neat way to make this whole environment seem more realistic in a certain way. And despite realism not necessarily being a strong point in these games, it's certainly an aesthetic to go for. And if you think about a lot of these referential venues in the same way that I do, then the most natural fit is that this game is one big reference to Untracked from the original SSX and SSX Tricky. A giant bare mountain with absolutely nothing going on, just you're bored in the wilderness. There's obviously more going on here, so maybe it's a discovered version of Untracked that organizers have made into an actual venue, and then massively expanded upon because it's its own giant mountain. Just, again, the reason I have issues with stuff like this is because the reason that Untracked was so special was because it really was just a mountain, in a pantheon of other tracks that had so much more going on. In this way, Untracked was sort of pure in its own form. And the purity of Untracked was something to look forward to in and of itself. With the entire game being basically an allusion to Untracked, it feels a lot less special. Not bad, just it kinda sours the feeling a little bit. The real truth is that I really like this series. And I'm coming at it from an angle of somebody who absolutely adores these games because I want them to be perfect. Admittedly, that's a fool's errand. No game is absolutely perfect. But I come at these games with a critical lens towards them because I just want them to be more than they already are. Mostly because games like these aren't made anymore, and probably never will. Not at this rate, anyway. Think about who published these games. It was EA, Electronic Arts, one of the scummiest publishers in video game history. Do we even want anything to come back out of SSX? From these guys? What's to say that a remake of the original SSX comes out and it's not chock full of awful microtransactions and DLC and just terrible immersion-breaking garbage that would absolutely ruin that game in theory? I have misgivings about some of my favorite games on this planet, but it's because I like them that much. These games, I feel, are a gift. Whenever I find myself particularly lost, sometimes I'll just pick up these games. Not because they ask me of anything, not because they have a goal or they teach me anything, but just because they put me in a flow state. I can immediately take my brain off of everything else and just go down a mountain, clear my mind so that I can come at whatever situation that's going on in my life with a more clear head. And you can call that whatever synonym of stupid you want to. The point is, these games are important to me. They're always going to be important to me. And while EA Big might no longer be a thing anymore, we're lucky in the fact that these games can still be played. They're well preserved, and there are still plenty of ways to go about finding them and playing them. Whatever method or manner you want to go about playing them, that's up to you. And I'm just glad we still have that. There might not be any more games to come out of this series anymore, but what we do have right here, right now, is still special and unique on their own. And if you do want to go back and play these games, you really do have every option imaginable for that. If you end up deciding to go back, because you watched this video, because you were interested in the gameplay and you wanted to see what they were about, and felt the need to tell me, that would honestly make my day. I want to do right by these games because they mean the world to me. And every video I make for the RTLG series kind of recontextualizes these old games that I had in my memories. It goes from me remembering certain parts about these games to now, oh, I made a video about this. People watched that video, and people relived those memories with me. And that's important too. That's why in its own way, this video series is going to be more important as time goes on. And really, I don't know. I don't know why I felt the need to say any of that. I have a lot to say for stuff that I like. And if you decide to play these games either through reliving your own memories, or for simply seeing what all the hype is about, then just let me know what you think. Now that all's said and done, I think I can finally wrap up now. If you enjoyed the video and want to hear more from me, then go ahead and like and subscribe. I upload every Friday and I cover a really wide range of topics just spanning all kinds of stuff that I enjoy. Or don't enjoy. I can be mean too sometimes. And if you want to talk about your own subjects for a video, or just debate about stuff that I've brought up in some of these videos, then you can leave a comment or join the Discord. If you decide to donate $1 a month to the Patreon, then you also get access to exclusive channels in the Discord, where you can talk with me or other members of the Patreon, and get your name read out loud at the end of these videos. If you don't feel like donating, that's fine, the Discord's still free to join, but if you do decide to donate, I also tease sneak peeks of videos in the text channel. If you decide to do none or any or all of these things, just know that at the end of the day, I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want me to cover more SSX stuff in the future, then hey, like I said before, stick around. There will come a day where I cover every one of these games in this series, for better and for worse. That's going to be it from me though. I hope y'all have a good day, and once again, thank you for watching.